The first time he raised his voice at me, I dropped a plate. It didn't break. It just spun on the wooden floor, around and around, while he stood over me in the kitchen, face red, Bible open on the table behind him, telling me what a wife was supposed to be. I was 19 years old. We had been married 4 months, and I remember thinking very clearly, very calmly, this is the rest of my life. The bishop had told us at our wedding that a husband leads and a wife follows. I just hadn't understood yet what the word lead actually meant inside the walls of an Amish home. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you about what Amish husbands are permitted to do to wives who step out of line is going to disturb you. And if you grew up in a world where obedience was confused with love, it's going to feel familiar in a way that hurts. Before I tell you what 8 years of that marriage looked like, let me introduce myself. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I share the stories my community would never let me speak out loud. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I lived inside an Amish marriage for 8 years before I found a way out. If you want to hear more truths from behind the prayer cap, please subscribe and tap the like button. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Let me explain something that took me years to understand after I left. In the Amish world, a husband's authority over his wife is not a suggestion. It is theology. It is structure. It is the entire architecture of the home. The Ordnung, our unwritten code, makes it plain. The husband is the head, the wife is the helper. He answers to the bishop. She answers to him. There is no appeal above his head that doesn't first pass through him. And here is the part outsiders never grasp. The community does not see correction of a wife as abuse. It sees it as discipline. It sees it as love. It sees it as a husband doing his sacred duty before God to keep his household in order. So when a wife is disobedient, and disobedience can mean anything from speaking too loudly at a family dinner to questioning a financial decision to wearing her prayer cap slightly wrong, the husband is not only allowed to correct her, he is expected to. I married Jonas in late November. I was 18. He was 24. Our courtship had been short, less than a year, and I thought I knew him. He was quiet at singings, polite to my father, hardworking on his family's dairy farm. The first months of our marriage were tender in their own awkward way. We were learning each other, but somewhere around month 4, something shifted. I had bought a different brand of flour at the store. Not a fancy brand, just a different one, a few cents cheaper. When I told him at supper, he set his fork down very slowly. He said, "I decide what comes into this house, not you." He didn't yell, he didn't have to. The look on his face was enough to make me apologize before I even understood what I was apologizing for. That was the first lesson. The corrections were not always loud. They were almost never loud at the beginning. They were quiet, certain, immovable. A wife who argued was prideful. A wife who explained herself was rebellious. A wife who cried was manipulative. There was no shape my feelings could take that wasn't already labeled as sin. By the second year, the rules had multiplied. I could not visit my own mother without telling him first. I could not write a letter without him reading it. I could not handle the money from the eggs I sold at the roadside stand. That money went into his hand, and he decided what came back to me. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Now let me tell you what correction actually looks like inside an Amish home, because the word covers a wide territory, and outsiders rarely see any of it. The first level is verbal. The husband speaks scripture at his wife. He chooses verses about submission, about silence, about the woman being deceived in the garden. He reads them out loud at the kitchen table while she stands. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The Bible is the whip. The second level is withdrawal. He stops speaking to her for days, sometimes weeks. He eats the food she cooks without looking at her. He sleeps with his back turned. He acts as though she is not in the room. In a community where a woman's entire identity is tied to her household, Being unseen by your own husband is a slow kind of starvation. The third level is restriction. He decides she may not attend the next Sunday service. He decides she may not go to her sister's quilting bee. He decides her buggy stays in the barn. She becomes a prisoner inside a house she scrubbed clean with her own hands. The fourth level, and this is where outsiders gasp, is physical. It does not happen in every home. I want to be honest about that, but it happens in enough homes that every Amish woman I have ever known has either lived it or knows the woman next door who has. In my home, it started in year 3. I had bought fabric for a new dress without asking. The fabric was plain blue, the same shade I always wore, but I had not asked. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a mark. He said, "You do not buy without my word." The mark faded in 4 days. I told no one. The next time it was my upper arm. The time after that, he shoved me into the kitchen counter. I bruised my hip so deep it was still yellow 2 weeks later. And in between, there were the long stretches of nothing, where he was kind, where he held my hand at night, where he asked God's blessing over our supper, and I would think to myself, maybe it is over. Maybe he has changed. Maybe I have learned. That is the part nobody tells you about. The kindness in between is what makes you stay. I want you to understand something about my community now, because this part matters more than the bruises. When a wife is being corrected harshly, the community does not intervene. Not because they don't notice, they notice everything. The Amish world is small, walls are thin, neighbors see, sisters see, mothers see. But intervention would mean stepping between a husband and his God-given authority. And no woman, especially no woman, would dare. My mother saw the mark on my wrist the first summer. She looked at it. She looked at me. And she said, "Jonas works hard. You must be patient with him." And she changed the subject to the green beans we were canning. That was the closest anyone ever came to acknowledging it. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. There is a process in the Amish world for a wife who cannot bear what is happening in her home. It is not divorce. Divorce does not exist for us. It is going to the bishop. I went once. I was 24. I had a bruise on my collarbone that I had hidden under my dress for a week. I sat in the bishop's parlor on a hard wooden chair, and I told him in the most careful words I could find that my husband was a hard man. The bishop was not cruel. I want to say that clearly. He was a man who believed what he had been taught, and he had been taught the same things Jonas had been taught. He listened, he nodded, he folded his hands. And then he said, "Martha, a wife's submission is the soil where a husband's gentleness grows. If he is hard with you, you must look first at your own heart. Have you been a helper to him? Have you been quiet? Have you been willing?" I went home that afternoon. Jonas knew where I had been. The bishop had told him. That night was the worst night of my marriage. I will not describe it. I will only say that I understood for the first time that the bishop was not a door out. The bishop was another lock. My friend Rebecca was married to a man named Amish. He was a deacon, respected in the church, the kind of man who prayed loud and long at every meal. She came to my kitchen one afternoon in year 6 of my marriage. She sat at my table. She did not take off her bonnet. She said, "Martha, I think I am going to die in that house." We did not cry. Amish women in trouble do not cry in front of each other. We just sat. I poured her coffee. She drank it. After a long time, she said, "Do you know anyone who has left?" I said, "I know one. A girl named Anna from over near Intercourse. She left 2 years ago. They say she is in Lancaster City. They say she works in a bakery." We were silent for another long time. Then Rebecca said, "Do you ever think about it?" I said every day. That was the first time I had ever said those words out loud to anyone, including myself. Saying them broke something. Saying them built something else. By year 7, I had started keeping a small jar of money hidden in the barn, behind a loose board in the 3rd stall. Egg money, sewing money, tiny amounts I could shave off the household without him noticing. I did not have a plan. I just had a jar. Some weeks I added $2. Some weeks I added 50 cents. The jar was not a plan. The jar was a prayer I could not say in words. By the end of that year, I had almost $300. By the middle of year 8, I had almost 500. I did not know where I would go. I did not know who would help me. I only knew that the jar was mine and that nothing else in my life was. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. The night I left, Jonas had thrown a coffee mug. It hit the wall behind my head and shattered. A piece of it cut my cheek, a small cut just below my eye. He said, "Look what you made me do." He went to bed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, blood drying on my face, and I knew. I knew the way you know a season has changed. I packed a single bag. I took the jar from the barn. I walked 4 miles in the dark to the phone shanty at the edge of our district, and I called the only number I had memorized. A woman in Lancaster City, a former Amish woman named Anna, the same Anna we had whispered about in my kitchen years before. She had given her number to Rebecca, and Rebecca had given it to me. Anna answered on the second ring. She said, "Where are you?" I told her. She said, "I am coming. Stay where you are." The shunning came fast. My parents' door closed. My sisters returned my letters. The bishop sent a message through a neighbor that I was no longer welcome at any service in any district that recognized our church. Jonas told the community I had been seduced by the world, that I had abandoned my vows, that I was a woman who had chosen pride over God. I lost everyone. I lost the language I had been raised in. I lost the rhythm of the seasons in a community that had marked every year of my life. What I gained was harder to name at first. I gained a small room above a bakery in Lancaster City. I gained a job washing dishes for $6 an hour. I gained a therapist who used words I had never heard before: coercion, isolation, trauma bond. I sat in her office and learned that what had happened in my home had a name in the outside world, and that name was not marriage. There is a moment I want to tell you about. About a year after I left, I was walking past a hardware store in town. There was a young woman in the window, English, modern, looking at paint colors. She was choosing, just choosing, a color for a wall in a room in a home that was hers. I stood on the sidewalk and watched her, and I started crying so hard I had to sit down on a bench, because I was 28 years old, and I had never once chosen the color of anything. Not a wall, not a dress, not a life. My therapist said something to me later that week that I have never forgotten. She said, "Martha, control rarely announces itself as control. It almost always arrives wearing the clothing of love." And I think about that sentence every day. Because that is the truth no one in my community could ever say out loud. What was done to me was not done by a monster. It was done by an ordinary man, raised by ordinary parents, in an ordinary church, all of whom believed they were doing something holy. I do not hate the Amish world. I want to say that clearly, because it is the truth. The Amish world gave me a work ethic that has carried me through every hard year since. It gave me a faith that I have rebuilt slowly in my own way. It gave me sisters and a mother whose faces I still see when I close my eyes. But the Amish world also gave me 8 years of a marriage where my body was not my own, my money was not my own, my voice was not my own, and the God who was supposed to love me was used as a key to lock every door. There is no theology that requires a woman to be afraid in her own kitchen. There is no scripture that consecrates her bruises as obedience. There is no faithful husband whose faithfulness depends on his wife's silence. If you grew up in a world where obedience was called love, where fear was called respect, where your smallness was called your virtue, I see you. You were not weak. You were not foolish. You were a woman trying to survive a system designed to make survival look like sin. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Tell me your story if you are ready. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. And if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap, Subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much I have not yet said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.